I'd actually be curious before I get started, if people just go around the room quickly tell me, a little bit about where you are, because the smart grid is a bunch of different ideas that we can talk about at a bunch of different levels. I really appreciate it. I can understand, my audience today, what your level of familiarity with these is.
I'm a meteorologist in the city.
Environmental engineer.
Okay, one electrical engineer. Now I have to be really careful. As you can tell, I'm not an engineer, so I pretend to be one sometimes. But I'll try to help. You can keep me honest.
I'm an electrical engineer, but I work with building systems.
That'd be great.
I'm a materials engineer, and I work with these.
I'm a chemist, and I work with state institutions, prisons, mental health centers, and universities throughout the state.
I'm a mechanical engineer.
I'm an energy auditor or a HERS rater, and I do work with homes and small businesses.
Psychologist interested in sustainability.
I'm an environmental engineer here at this geologist.
I'm a research coordinator in the center.
I'm the director acting at the center here. I'm an entomologist by training.
Okay, so we have a wide range of interests. So hopefully I'm going to keep some of this will be general, some will be more technical. I think I probably have about half an hour sort of presentation that hopefully will generate a lot of questions. So if there's something you really want to jump in as I'm talking to, feel free to do that, or I think we have plenty of time for questions at the end. So first of all, how many of you remember during the Super Bowl a bizarre GE ad talking about this thing called the smart grid? So it was really bizarre. I'm sitting there watching a Super Bowl game I actually didn't particularly care about the outcome of, but it's a good way to spend a Sunday afternoon. And I've been thinking about the smart grid for a while, and it's, how much is this millions of dollars to air an ad on the Super Bowl, and the scarecrow pops up from GE talking about the need to modernize the electric grid. So I sort of feel like this was the coming out party for the smart grid. It's something that has been being talked about in sort of technical and policy world as well, but the general public had, for the most part, had no idea that smart grid was even an issue. Probably, and after seeing it added to it at the Super Bowl, still probably have no idea what it is, but at least the idea is a little bit out there. I mean, it was something that, if you look at the energy policies last summer about Obama and McCain, they both had strong policy recommendations supporting the advancement of the smart grid, which we've now seen roll into federal policy. But this was the first wave of sort of beginning to educate the public what the smart grid might be. So one of the challenges is, I think most people don't really know how the current electric grid works. So it's a little unfair to call today's grid the dumb grid, but it creates a nice dichotomy. So bear with me for a second. I think what makes the smart grid potentially interesting requires, in part, a little bit of understanding how the current grid works. It's a very, most of the electric grid was designed late 19th, early middle of 20th century, and it, for the most part, works quite well. The lights stay on most of the time. They're mostly large generating stations, a high voltage transmission system, and slowly voltage gets dropped down until you have wires and feeders going through neighborhoods serving homes and businesses. And it's very much a one-way system. The power is pushed out on the generating stations. They really put out enough power to make sure that the last home or business on any specific series of electrical wires has enough voltage to keep the lights on, the air conditioner running, etc. But because there's below the distribution substation, letter D on here, the utilities don't really know what's going on. There's actually fairly sophisticated controls down to roughly there, depending on where you are in the country, more or less sophisticated. But what's going on the local neighborhood level electric grid, really the utility doesn't know. I mean, people think when the power goes out, the utility knows about it. The way they know is when people start calling them saying, my power's out. And if one person calls, they pretty much ignore it. They figure that person blew their fuses. 2 or 3 people call, who live near each other, then they begin to think, okay, maybe we should send a truck out there and see what's going on. So that's what makes the grid dumb to me, is that it's about pushing electrons out to power appliances and devices and lights, but there's no intelligence in it to help monitor, maintain it, and at the customer level, there's no feedback loops. So the smart grid is just a term that's been used by a lot of different people. There's a listserv on the Edison Electric Institute for people interested in these issues. And someone about a month ago put a quick question out saying, I need a simple definition of the smart grid, so I'm going to talk to some regulators. And it was this fascinating case study. There was about 20 different responses, some of them by some of the leading people working in this field. I think the shortest one was probably 500 words, and they got worse. I mean, and there was, because there's so many different ideas, depending on who you're thinking about it, the issues that they're concerned about were different. And so there's no nice, simple definition of smart grid. to me, what it's about is this idea of adding intelligence and automation to the grid, basically adding an information layer over it. And it's also about beginning to network things. If you think about the previous picture, any house at the end of a wire, there's just one wire. Something goes wrong with that wire, everything past a certain point gets cut off. If you want to do something about it, you have to send trucks out, climb up some poles, flip some switches around, move some wires. So this sort of big picture vision of a smart grid is one where you do a lot of things. You add a lot of intelligence along the grids so that they can remotely monitor what's happening, open and close switches. Imagine that a storm comes through, there's a wire get knocked down in a certain neighborhood, but there's wires elsewhere that are still intact. If you could actually remotely open and close switches to reconfigure the electric grid down to the neighborhood level, you could get people's power on faster. You're still going to have to go out and fix what's broken, but again, that's one place where there'd be a lot of advantage. Another issue would be how to integrate in small renewable energy sources, small-scale wind or solar industry. The laws in Illinois have improved a lot recently about net metering and interconnection of small-scale generation, but still, the fully realized ways in which lots of new small generation sources get added to the grid, and the people who run the electric grid know what's out there, that vision isn't really complete yet. And then the part that can touch consumers the most is the meter that's going to be in your home and changing that meter from the old-fashioned meter to something a bit more modern. And a lot of what we talk about is the consumer opportunities that the smart grid creates. I hope this is somewhat readable. This is a graph from a Department of Energy report that came out last year that I thought was pretty good. It sort of talks about the visions of how things work today and what the future could be. So the first level, you can read this at all, is about active consumer participation. Most people now don't know anything about electricity use. They're passive consumers of it. You use it, you get a bill at the end of the month, you grumble a little bit, you pay it. That's pretty much what 99.99% of people's interactions with the electric system consists of. The smart grid is a vision. It includes a vision where people are more active and informed, where you get better information about the energy use. You get it faster, even near real time or near real time, so that you can make decisions about your energy use. You understand it a bit more, and you can manage it better. Better generation options. Again, we have a system that was designed mostly for large power plants supplying lots of small users. The vision of smart grid would be, by having intelligence, knowing which way the power is flowing better, the ability to plug in lots of smaller sources. Plug-in electric hybrid vehicles are going to be one particularly interesting aspect of that. New products and services. Again, most of the stuff in the energy industry is, of course, dominated by large utilities offering services and stuff. Again, a better market with a bit more information will allow new entrants to come in and offer services. Again, this is a vision. We'll see what actually happens. Better power quality. Again, a lot of the grid was designed for lights, for motors, not necessarily for digital equipment. Improving power quality and reliability for the digital economy is something that is really important. For most people, it's not that big an issue, but there's certain types of businesses that have to invest a lot of their own money on their own reliability because they can't always trust the electric grid to supply them power in a high enough quality for their operations. Optimizing assets. A lot of power gets lost on the electric grid, again, because it's very much a one-way system. They don't know what's happening at the end of the line. So better having more information, making sure that all the different transformers and relay switches get used better. There's actually some estimates out there that you could cut the total amount of generation you would need by several percent just by making the grid operate more efficiently. And then this last one is sort of interesting, these issues about how you deal with the problem. So there was a whole slew of articles last week about hackers hacking into the electric grid and disrupting stuff. So DOE in this report was making the argument that the current system isn't secure enough and we need a more secure system. So it's interesting what information is out there in the grid and how you keep it more secure. So from the consumer point of view, the big issue has been the electric meter. The meter up there on the left is a roughly 1900 meter. The meter on the right, I think, is about 2003. These are basically the same devices. They measure electricity. There's a little metal dial that spins. There's other little dials that someone comes out once a month or so and reads them. It works. They measure electricity total consumption. They're pretty inexpensive, but they don't really tell you anything about your energy use. They don't give you any sort of opportunities to engage and think about your energy use. It's also only spent one way. So smart metering, which is one piece of the smart grid I think people are hearing the most about, creates all sorts of opportunity because it gives you the opportunity to give new rate structures, new technology, because the smart meter vision is one where the meter records energy use in smaller increments. Depending on who you ask, what technology you go, that might be an hourly intervals, half hour, for certain types of business applications down to 5 minutes or even less. And it's basically a little computer. So it stores that, and it has communication back up to the utility. There's a bunch of different technologies emerging for what that backhaul should be. Most of them are wireless, various types of wireless technologies. So that meter, rather than having to send a meter reader out to read it, it will tell the utility every now and then, here's how much consumption, depending on who you are and what your needs are, and frequency can change. So the utility knows what's going on in the meter, because if the power goes out, they lose the signal from that meter. So again, right away, it changes things about reliability. It lowers for the utilities the cost of going out and reading meters. The other thing that a lot of interest is out there is the idea that the meter actually has two-way communications built into it. So not only is the meter telling people somewhere else what's going on in the home, but the utility can send signals out to that meter to do a bunch of different things. One thing that utilities are very interested in is the ability to remotely turn on and off meters. There's good and bad aspects of that. I'm concerned with the issue of it becoming easier for utilities to turn people off if they don't pay their bills. I think we need a new set of consumer protections. On the other hand, if the meter is off and someone moves into a home, the ability to turn them on more quickly without having to send a crew out there to do it is sort of attractive. The other thing is these meters are increasingly being built with various sorts of home area networking functionality. The most popular flavor these days is something called Zigbee. It's basically a Wi-Fi protocol for appliances. There's still a vigorous debate going on about what the right standard should be. So again, if you have a program where you need to cut air conditioning usage a bit, the idea that you send a signal to the meter would then talk to the air conditioner saying for the next half hour, cut back your usage a little bit. These are the sort of opportunities that people are really excited about that smart metering could create. So the smart grid is a combination of things at the utility level to make the grid work more efficiently, but then it's extending down to the consumer and business level by the meters being the gateway to have a different type of interaction between customers and the utility. And it creates all sorts of innovation. These are just a few things. I'll go into a bit more. We've been playing a lot with the work of how do you engage people to think about their energy use. I'm going to show a bunch more slides of pictures of sorts of devices people are looking at for use in the home to monitor energy use. The home is a generator. We have some rudimentary net metering programs where if you have solar panels, you can sell back to the grid. But again, making those work better so you can have better choices about when you're taking power from the grid or using your own. And then all sorts of new technology automating efficiency. For example, I use the air conditioner. We know a lot of the large appliance manufacturers have been watching this for a while. There's already fairly sophisticated computers built into refrigerators, dishwashers, newer laundry equipment. But they don't have anyone to talk to until it breaks. The repairman comes out, he plugs his computer in, and it tells them what's wrong. But you could actually automate some of that stuff and begin to sort of have programs where, if the compressor on a refrigerator turned off for 20 minutes, the temperature of your food's not going to change that much. But if you have an emergency and you need to cut demand on the electric system to avoid a blackout, that can be very, very valuable. So the appliance manufacturers have been a bit resistant to this stuff because adding this technology into a large appliance literally adds about $5 in cost. But they're very, very tight margins. So they've been saying, well, wait till the programs exist that our appliances could talk to, and we'll start building the appliances. There's a bit of a chicken and egg problem going on here. People are talking about this idea, but no one is willing to take the leap forward. But just in the last few months, it sounds like a few of the appliance manufacturers are going to begin to build some smart appliances that would have the ability to use Zigbee to talk to electric meters in the areas where they're being deployed. So there's a lot of unknowns here, a lot of excitement. The details are clearly not worked out.
How do you spell it? Zigbee?
Zigbee. And Google it and you'll learn way more than you ever want to know about. These are just a random selection of some in-home energy display devices. I'm completely fascinated with these things. These work on a couple different versions of these. Most of them have something that connects to your meter. Either if you have a smart meter directly, or some people, the one in the upper right actually, they have clamped on an old-fashioned meter and watches the dials against that optical sensor.
You have that one in the upper right.
You have one of those?
Yeah.
It work for you okay?
Yeah, it works all right. It works either with the dial or with there's a little LED on the top of the meter for dial meter.
So, but you're an electrical engineer, so you probably were able to install it correctly?
Yeah, and I shared it with somebody at work and they had a hard time.
Yeah,
my wife doesn't think it's interesting at all, so
it varies, yeah. I know there's been some pilots of these where they wanted to have people install them. They send them to people to install themselves, and it just didn't work, and they ended up sending out crews to install. It's not that hard to install, but if you've most people never touch their electric meter. Most people probably don't even know where it is. Assuming they know where their electric meter in their house is, they're probably a little afraid to strap a little device onto it. So it's a really interesting technology. The one right in the middle is a Wi-Fi enabled thermostat. So You can control this thermostat by your computer. If you're not at home, if you leave your computer on, your Wi-Fi out, you can remotely monitor what's going on in your house, temperature, and change the temperature settings. It's almost $400. It's really expensive. It's still an early adopter toy as far as it's concerned. The one on the lower right is an energy dashboard that GE just they developed it a year or two ago, and I put it up there because earlier this week Miami announced a major smart grid initiative in Miami where they're going to wire up a million homes and do all sorts of really interesting things. And that energy dashboard is going to be one of the things that we'll be providing initially a subset of Miami residents to begin to monitor your energy. So there's a lot. Someone told me recently that they counted 18 different companies developing these sorts of things. So again, this is coming where people are beginning to think, well, how do you get people to understand their energy use?
Energy dashboard, is that their product, Miami?
So GE developed it. I think they called it Eco Dashboard. Literally all I know about it is this one screenshot. There's a bunch of different competitors. I'm going to come back to one in just a minute. But here's sort of the problem. I dug up this picture on the left recently. This was the first digital music player. And it sort of looks like a Walkman. It's got a nice little hard-to-read screen, small, hard-to-read, hard-to-push buttons. But compare that to, say, the iPod, which was clearly the first digital music player. People said, I want one of those. It's simple, it's intuitive. And I think that's where this stuff is. I mean, some of those products have been getting better, but most of them are really, to me, look a lot more like the one on the left and one on the right. So I think there's a lot of work going on how to engage people to think about their energy use. And I don't think anyone has it right yet.
Is Apple working on the iMeter?
Well,
Surely they should.
I'll one up you. How about Google?
Yeah.
So Google, a couple of months ago, announced the Power Meter. So in one day, Google got more press for this than all these other display devices I think have got combined over the last couple of years. Because of, obviously, they rule the world. They get good press coverage. They've announced very little information about their Power Meter, other than they developed this thing. They have a couple dozen of their staff playing around with it, and they're saying that they're cutting back the energy use quite a lot. And what their idea is, obviously, I mean, if you try to think of where's the place people get their information, obviously so many people use Google, their home pages. Is an intuitive place to park this information there. A little weird display device in the corner people might not look at after the novelty wears off. Google's Google homepage is going to be a lot more engaging. They'll also use it appears the sort of interface about how you change around what you're looking at is very similar to the Google Finance type thing. So I think people are being educated that Google's tools and how you use them is just going to follow the philosophy of their other tools. But that's about all anybody knows about it. We've been talking to them. They're going to start up a few pilot programs, and they said, once we actually have some pilot programs up and running, we'll come back and talk to you. There's a few things that really intrigue me about this. So I mean, the first few things sort of make sense. That it's about analyzing and understanding energy. Yeah, all these things do that. It's about helping find ways to reduce your energy use. Fine, everyone's curious about that. But the third one was sharing. There's a couple other people playing around in this world, but Google's the first one I've seen who's integrating these in-home display device ideas with this. The idea that I think Google is such a natural aggregator, I think the sort of things people do with Google Maps. The idea that, some point in the future when lots and lots of people are using this tool, that you'd be able to aggregate that information, compare yourself to your neighbors or other peers. I think Google might be really on something very exciting there. But again, I don't exactly know what it is, but I do have faith in them in getting things right. So we have lots of little startups building those little devices. We have GE playing it. We have Google playing in this world. So a lot more to come. Another thing I wanted to mention was that idea of community microgrids. This is actually a diagram of the IIT campus in Chicago, where they're developing a microgrid, basically, so using a lot of smart grid technologies for use on their campus, where they've had reliability problems. They're fed by ComEd from two different places. They have a lot of old mechanical switches. Things go out, they have to send someone out to wander around trying to find where the power outage is. Most of the buildings are only fed from one side, so there's power outage in one place, it could wipe out a whole part of the campus. So they've had a lot of problems. They also have some small-scale generation on their campus. So they've actually gotten funding from the Department of Energy, ComEd's working with, as well as an organization called the Galvin Institute, that I'll come back to in a little bit, to develop basically a microgrid on the IIT campus, where they've networked everything together and put in smart switches, so they are able to reconfigure their grid remotely. They don't have to send crews out to fix things. They also have generation at IIT, and they can watch the real-time energy prices and decide whether or not IIT should produce its own power, if they can do it cheaper than they can buy from the grid, or at other times they actually can sell back to the grid. And so again, it's really interesting, it's a little microcosm of what a community, which in some ways is what a university campus is, could do by taking this thing where rather than waiting for everyone to do it, they said in our particular situation, we have some issues here we want to deal with, and they're applying the technology to their campus. There's only a small town could do this as well, or an industrial park as well. So there's a lot of open issues. One is security. I think I already mentioned this, that we're adding lots of devices, lots of information. The current trend these days is to use IP protocol for meter communications. How secure is this going to be? I mean, there's always a fear. In California, they were working on a standard where they were going to require all new construction to have a thermostat that the utility could control remotely when they had a power crisis. And they were going to start requiring all new construction. They were a day away from announcing the new standard when Rush Limbaugh heard about it and turned it into a Big Brother thing, and all hell broke loose, and they actually pulled the standard. But one of the things they spent a long time doing was they had the fear that if the utility had the ability to remotely control thousands or eventually millions of thermostats, if someone could break into that system and start turning on and off air conditioning, you could create huge power surges on the grid and knock it out. So they say they got the standard security right to get that right. But I think as we're adding more information to the electric grid, making sure the security issues are dealt with correctly is going to be important. I'm not a security person, so that's about the limit of my knowledge. Standards and interoperability. All the people developing those devices, the meters that do this, they all talk the talk of consistent standards, and making sure that everything's interoperable with each other. The impression I get is that some of that's truer than others, that not all these devices actually work as well with other people's equipment as you might want. There's also a lot of work. Apparently, Secretary Chu was very unhappy about how slow the national standards for a lot of the electrical equipment is here. So he's really pushing NIST to really very fast track, put together some national standards for all the new smart grid devices. Vaporware is another thing. I mean, Google, I think, is a little guilty of this. They announced something without a lot of details, but I suspect they'll get it right. A lot of the things that have been announced around the smart grid, it's not clear, if the manufacturers actually are making these things and how available they really are. The really fun one would be who pays. This stuff is all going to be very expensive. There's a potential, obviously, to do better energy management over time to reduce costs in a lot of different ways. But certainly there's a lot of upfront costs. So there's a big regulatory fight about how to properly allocate the initial upfront costs of these, and over time who pays for what aspects of these. And the final really interesting one is the role of plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, where right now, there's not a lot of them. They don't really have that much impact on the grid. But over time, as you get thousands or millions of plug-in hybrids, where you can both charge from the grid, but also potentially do battery storage to get back to the grid, that makes grid operations much more complicated. Plus, if you have one of these cars, depending on where you don't want your friend to come over and plug his car into your outlet, and you pay for him charging up his car. So I think the vision that over time you have a system where different cars can plug in at different places, and who's using that power and which direction it's going is going to be really important. This sort of adding of intelligence automation to the grid is going to be really essential. And one of our sister programs, they call IGO car sharing, sort of like Zipcar, we have here in Champaign. We just got 2 plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and I drove one down today. It's not so good on the highway because it's on storage chips, but driving around Chicago yesterday, I got over 80 miles a gallon equivalent by running off batteries. So sort of my first time driving it, but a little taste of the future. So what's happening in Illinois? That's a big picture of the smart grid and what's going on. Does that sort of give an initial overview? Any questions at this point?
I guess your who pays question on that previous one, it's interesting how, say in town, a lot of those things are already incorporated. The smart meters, let's say, it's been paid for because Ameren thinks it's cheaper to just cell phone the meters than it is to have people go out to them. So it's interesting how some of these parts are already paid for.
Ameren has a really interesting challenge that they actually in retrospect, got started a little too early. The system they're more or less done deploying is actually one-way metering technology. Those meters wake up every now and then and tell the utility how much they're using. There's not communication back down to the meter from Ameren. So they actually, I think, have a difficult thing once these things settle down. What do they do? The fact that they've just deployed a lot of meters that are sort of the previous generation of technology. It's going to be a big challenge for them.
Yeah, when you say the grid is one way, but I mean, you could do net metering now. I mean, if every home was producing the same amount of energy it was using, maybe not at the same time, wouldn't that work with what we currently have?
You can. I mean, but if you start having a lot of, right now the net metering is pretty small, so the grid operators aren't really seeing it on the system. If you start having a lot of it, the operations of the grid get more complicated.
Uh-huh.
So there is some ability to do that. Again, one of the things that the utility always worry about is, especially if you think about a reliability issue where there's some wires down somewhere. They go out and their crews think the power is out in that area, and if someone has a solar panel feeding back to the grid and they don't know about it or don't have properly locked out, their crews can get electrocuted, which I think we're probably against.
So basically, if I could be sucking 2 kilowatts, I should be able to push it back.
I mean, intrinsically, the wires don't care which way the electrons are flowing, right? That's probably the simplest way to put it. But it's much more about the counting and the information about what's going on here that is what's lacking now. Yes, technically, you can do pieces of this right now. It's not like all the pieces of the puzzle are fully put together. So a lot of things are happening in Illinois. I'm going to talk for a little bit about the Illinois Smart Grid Initiative. It's a report we just published based on some meetings last year, and some copies over here. That was one thing we just wrapped up. ComEd is in the process of planning a smart metering pilot. AMI is Advanced Metering Infrastructure. It's just pretty more or less interchangeable with smart meters and ideas. So they're going to be a pilot program next year. There's an Illinois statewide smart grid collaborative that's a 2-year-long sort of policy-making process that's just started. And finally, just last week, Department of Energy released their draft guidelines for the $4 billion in stimulus money that's going to be available for smart grid investments. So there's a lot of different things going on, and they all overlap and either interconnect or fail to interconnect in a bunch of different ways. So one of the problems is the utility industry is inherently slow, cautious, conservative, not always very imaginative. So this is just a little snapshot of what the timeline of all this looks like here in Illinois. In 2006 was the end of our restructuring period in Illinois, new electric rates came in. Okay. But ComEd and Ameren then in 2007 filed new rates that they wanted to adjust how much they charge the distribution of electricity. So that was, I think, late 2007 they did that. In the summer of 2008, we held our Illinois Smart Grid Initiative workshops to get people to start talking about these issues. I'll come back to those in a minute. The 2007 filings by ComEd and Ameren resulted in the fall of 2008, the Illinois Commerce Commission ordered ComEd to start a pilot project and both utilities to take part in this collaborative planning process. So over the last 4 or 5 months, ComEd's been holding workshops on the various pilot programs. The collaborative process is starting. ComEd's about to file the proposal for what they're going to do for their pilot next month. Meanwhile, these federal stimulus guidelines, none of us were talking about even a few months ago, suddenly have dropped on us. So this, it all goes well, will mean that ComEd will start installing meters this fall, so they can run pilot programs summer of 2010, so that at the end of 2010 they can do an evaluation, report back to the Commerce Commission. Meanwhile, the statewide process will also report back. So then in 2011, we can figure out what regulatory and legislative changes are needed in Illinois to support a wide-scale smart grid deployment, which again, that's probably another 11-month process once that proceeding starts. So there's lots of pieces going on right now. The reality is, I think, large-scale wholesale change in our system is not going to happen before 2012, even though pieces of it started in 2007. This is not the speed I would say Google normally operates, but this is actually fairly fast for the electric industry. So I think one of the things is there's more and more talk about these ideas and stuff. I mean, GE, so 2009 they start running ads in the Super Bowl. I mean, these are the time frames, maybe with the exception of California and Texas, these are the sort of time frames you're seeing around the country. So I think there's going to be a real lag as this stuff comes along, which might not be a bad thing in the sense that a lot of the technology is not as mature as we want it to be. So this gives people more time to develop those various in-home display devices, and they make the meters, they can work better and cheaper. But again, this is not going to happen overnight. So we held the Illinois Smart Grid Initiative last year. People in Illinois really hadn't thought much about the smart grid. We had funding from an organization called the Galvin Electricity Initiative. It's a project started by Bob Galvin, who was the former CEO of Motorola. There's a slight exaggeration, but he more or less invented the cell phone, him and his team. So he's a pretty incredible guy. He retired and family sold the company before it started having problems. So we think about the old Motorola, not the Motorola of today, as sort of the Galvin vision. So his wife got stuck in New York during the blackouts in 2004, and so he got sort of being his bonnet about this and decided that he wanted one of his legacies to be figuring out how to modernize the electric grid. He has this vision of what he calls perfect power, which is the idea that you have a grid that's 100% reliable, everything works perfectly, everything's interoperable, entrepreneurs can come in and do things. So he's using his retirement and his money he was able to make building Motorola into a giant corporation to help push along things like improving the electric grid. There's a few other initiatives too. He wants to build lots of tunnels to solve transportation problems. He's also very interested in neighborhood-scale nuclear plants, but we won't talk about this. So we did this as an informal process. It was really interesting. When we first started the Illinois Smart Grid Initiative, there were quite a few stakeholders, especially in some of the consumer advocate groups, who came sort of saying, this just sounds like a lot of new stuff. The utility wants to spend lots of money on, put in a rate base and increase everybody's rates. And we're not interested. This just sounds like a complete waste of time. But through the meetings we had last year, I think because we did it outside of a regulatory framework where we were always arguing, by the end of the workshops, I wouldn't say all the consumer advocates were completely in love with the smart grid vision, but at least they understood that this was the future and they had to think about how it should work. And they, the issue of who pays for things and when is clearly where they moved on. So it was really important, I think, to educate people that in Illinois think about energy issues, that this is coming and we have to start planning for thinking about how this is going to happen. We just released our final report. That's the website. I have some copies of the report, a fact sheet, and an executive summary over here if anyone would like. Meanwhile, we now have these. ComEd's going to be doing a smart metering pilot, and there's going to be a statewide policy collaborative. And these are both the result of orders of the Illinois Commerce Commission. So we've now unfortunately moved back into a regulatory process where all the discussion about what's going to happen with the smart grid are now having a much more formal process. But I think we were successful by doing an informal process first to get people to at least open up their imagination a little bit. So a little bit of the findings from the report. Nothing too surprising. Smart grid should be able to really fundamentally improve reliability. We certainly were seeing around some of the suburbs of Chicago a bunch of communities where their reliability was significantly worse than their neighbors. It had to do with how the electric grid in that area was built, the age, and the ability to invest or not invest in it. So one thing we were really finding was it wasn't everywhere, but a lot of communities where they really were concerned about reliability. It was something that was impacting homes and businesses in those communities. They were very taken with the idea of modernizing electric grid and allowing reliability in the communities to be better. One of the moments I really liked was the village manager of Oak Park. I guess there were a couple high-rise senior citizen buildings. The power goes out occasionally. And it's a real pain because they have to turn on the backup generators to run the elevators so they can evacuate the senior citizens who live there, some of whom are in wheelchairs, et cetera. So the idea that you had a grid that they knew more about what was going on, that the outage times would be faster. It sounds a little like light bulb go off in his head. Where he says that by getting this technology to work better, they might be able to reduce the number of times they have to evacuate high-rise senior citizen centers with reliability problems. I mean, it's one tiny little piece of what the smart grid could be about. There was a fascinating way in which a local government official thought about what this could be. We touched on it a little bit already, how to better integrate renewable energy. And then I think the programs where people get more options about their rate structure, which we'll come back to, is another important opportunity. The other thing that's really important is how to open the door to entrepreneurs who want to come into this world. Again, where do you create new products and services that people can use and use this information to better manage energy use? There's a lot of people, especially in the commercial sector, are trying to find ways to get people to use their building energy management systems better. But better participation in energy programs might be a way to do it. So I think, and private investment is important. Likewise, a lot of these municipalities, there's no way for them to get the utility to invest in the grid a little bit more. So finding ways so that local government can modernize their grids faster, maybe in the system as a whole, is something that's going to be really important. I think I'll skip this. This is just, the ongoing issue that is not a nice, clean definition of the smart grid is really important. The other thing I think that came out of our meetings that were really important is that it has to be consumer-driven. I mean, a lot of the stuff obviously started electric utilities, and they were concerned with meter reading, relay switches along the grid, all these things that were very important for the operation of the utility. But utilities I don't think, have a natural feel for their customers and what they want and what they need and what can benefit them. So we need to keep this constantly about make those in-home display devices better and more intuitive so people want them. Make things like net metering easier. Make the plugging hybrid electric vehicles into the grid easier. So making sure that there's always consumer focus in this. It's not just about the utility putting a lot more hardware out there that makes their operations work better is really essential. These are ongoing things that are important to mention. I think I'll skip those. I'll skip that. So what's next? ComEd is about to file a proposal to do somewhere between 100 and 200,000 electric meters piloted in parts of the state of Chicago and the western suburbs. They're going to be testing basically how the actual communications infrastructure works. In the state of Chicago, there's some interesting issues because of larger multi-family buildings. How will the radio communication systems with meters will work well. We'll be testing some new rate structures, and as well as some of those devices I showed you or their successors are going to be tested. And then also, how do you begin to get people to think about this? Most people, probably have already forgotten that Super Bowl ad. So how do you get people to know that not only do they get a new electric meter, but it gives them new opportunities? They also plan to apply with the City of Chicago for stimulus funds. One thing that was surprised people a little last week when the guidelines came out is DOE had a much lower cap on how much any one utility could ask for. So I think they're going to have to scale back their goals for what they can ask for federal money. It looks like they're wanting to do more projects around the country that are smaller rather than a handful of very big smart grid programs. If the pilot's successful, if they can demonstrate that the operational system benefits outweigh the costs for it, then they will seek a full deployment of a smart grid for ComEd. Ameren is in a different situation because again they've done sort of an earlier version of the meter, and they are looking a lot at the technologies that are at the grid operations level. But again, there's this 2-year-long process that just started a couple of weeks ago. The next meeting's next month. That was going to put together sort of statewide policies. So I think for Ameren, figuring out what their smart grid strategy is going to be a lot more difficult. At this point, I couldn't predict what that's going to be. But again, I think we'll know over the next couple of years.
So what are these smart meters going to talk to? The appliances out there and these things at home as a part of it too.
Right. Well, they'll talk in both directions. They're obviously going to put up, depending on which technology they pick. There's a couple of different technology out there. Some actually use the cellular system. Some of them vendors actually put up their own radio towers. The meter will be talking to the utility. Then also, because this is a pilot program for ComEd, some of the money will be spent to give people some of those in-home display devices, to give people smart thermostats. Both, let me rephrase it, both give them as well as they're very interested in what are people's willingness to pay for upgraded technology. So there may be some experiments that have to do with, are people willing to go Home Depot and buy a communicating thermostat, which also maybe will save, lower your gas costs as well. So they're going to be testing a bunch of different combinations of technologies and how people get those. But again, availability. This is one of my concerns about the availability of technology, making sure that everything is actually as available as we want it to be. In Chicago, one thing we're particularly concerned about, Zigbee, which is this protocol for appliances to talk to meters, it's a pretty low power system. It only goes about 50 or 100 feet. There's a lot of buildings, probably hundreds of thousands of units in the city of Chicago, where the meter is the basement in a multi-unit building. I live in my meter is a lot more than 50 feet away from my apartment. So Zigbee will not work. I don't need a pilot right now to tell me that. But there are other technologies and other communication protocols you can use to get a meter to talk to an appliance. So really understanding in a city environment what's going to work and what's not going to is going to be a really important part of this. In California, they're mandating that all the meters they're installing have Zigbee built into the meter. So California is where a lot of this stuff is going to start. But again, our housing stock is different from California. So understanding what's different here is going to be a really big part of the challenge here. The other thing everyone is pilot's going to get will be, because the meters will be talking to the utility on an hourly or daily basis, everybody will have access to a website where you can go in and look at your energy use and see it. And depending on what sort of rate you're on, that may or may not be interesting. So there's going to be some, some of what can you do through the web, or people creating, their own sort of data services. It's a pretty cool company. There's also one, besides the Google thing, which is interesting, there's a company called Greenbox, that people who developed Flash and then sold it to Adobe have a new technology startup where they're developing energy display, web-based energy display stuff. And it's pretty slick. Again, we'll have to see how it develops. So I think there's a lot of people playing around with this, what do you do with this information. So what can you do today? So this is actually maybe the good news if you're an Ameren customer. And this is almost a sales pitch, but not quite, so I'll keep it mild. Our organization, the Center for Neighborhood Technology, we're a nonprofit in Chicago where we work on these issues. We got really interested about 6-7 years ago with the issues of idea of real-time pricing, exposing people to the actual wholesale price of electricity, which varies hour to hour. So we started a pilot program with ComEd in 2003, and we had it for 4 years, where we gave residential customers access to hourly prices. And then that program is now expanded. It's available more widely to both ComEd and Ameren customers now. And what we found was, and this is a program, we didn't use those old-fashioned meters, and we didn't use the smart meters, because in 2003, if you wanted a meter that could talk to remotely, it was cost $2,000 each, and that didn't seem like such a good idea. But ComEd actually had meters they used in industrial facilities that would record the energy use, but the meter readers would go in and basically plug what looked like a Palm Pilot into it to download the data. So it was a smart meter in the sense that it would record energy information in half-hour blocks, but it was a dumb meter in fact in the sense that it didn't have anybody to talk to other than a meter reader. So we were able to use sort of a hybrid of the technologies to get this started. And what we found is that we gave people prices that varied by the hour. But most of the time, pricing power is quite cheap. Every now and then, especially on hot summer days, it gets a lot more expensive. And if you ask people, if you educate people what they can do to manage their energy use, ask them to cut back, we got people to cut back the energy use somewhere anywhere between 15 to 20% on hot summer days. We also saw that people, because they started thinking about their energy use, got more energy efficient. Not a lot, but just through voluntary behavior changes, reduced the usage. We also saw that people's bills went down because they weren't paying someone else to manage the price of electricity for them. Also, depending on how they air conditioning usage, if they, especially people with less air conditioning, they weren't paying price-hour prices at all, could save money. So it would vary. In 2005, actually most of the people in the program lost money because power prices went up a lot. But over time, and we've seen this continue with the program we're now running with Ameren, bill savings run roughly 10%. It's not for everybody, depending on your energy use profile. It can vary. But again, the idea that you get people to save money and become more energy efficient is pretty intriguing. And so we're running this program, and we're busy exploring how this will impact energy markets. It's right now a very low-tech program. It says that we don't have smart thermostats available for people. We're working on that. It's going to take a while. But again, we're finding that people will actually manage their energy use if you educate them about it once you get them engaged. And you don't necessarily need a huge amount of technology to do it. So I'm very fascinated with all the automation of thermostats, in-home display devices, sort of stuff. But the fact is we're running a program to get people thinking about their energy use and making pretty good changes by themselves. Where we've done little tests of automating piece of that, it gets better, but obviously technology costs money. So I think there's a lot of the right mixture between what people can do voluntarily versus what you can do for automation is one of the big open issues. And so just in case you're curious, the name of the program we run with the Ameren customer is called Power Smart Pricing. So you can take a look at the website for that and learn about it and see if it would apply to you. So it's been going, well, actually right now because of the economy, the price of electricity is really, really cheap. So the program has actually been great for its participants recently. Last summer it wasn't so good for a couple months because the price of power was pretty high. So if you're interested in beginning to think about your energy use, getting more information. In this program, because the meters are read once a month, we have the ability to let people see their energy use on an hourly basis, but they have to wait until their bill gets issued and the data becomes available. So you don't have that immediate feedback that I've done something in my home. I can see what it looks like. You can say, what did I do 3 weeks ago on Sunday? I mean, you can do that. So it's sort of interesting, but it's not all the pieces quite put together yet.
Is that for Chicago? So we have that option.
Right, so there's a program like this that we help administer for ComEd, and then we run the program for Ameren.
So why, and then in an area like this where we have the one-way smart meter, the halfway smart meter that reports every 15 minutes or so or something, can we see real-time pricing that way?
Not yet. I mean, unfortunately, again, because Ameren started that meter deployment before this was all figured out, they actually they go give a slightly different meter out there for the customers on this program. And so if you've had your meter switched out, they unfortunately have to go out again and switch it to a different meter, because the meters that are out there for regular Ameren customers either don't store very much data, or some of the meters, they've taken an old-fashioned meter and retrofitted it, which basically says that watches how much the dial is spun. So they still have to go out and swap out meters, and still it's only like once a day or once every few days it sends information back to Ameren, and then they only once a month consolidate a user's data for presentment. So we're talking to them about if there's any way to speed that up, but they haven't quite figured it out yet. So, I wish we had a better way, a faster way to do it. Yes?
Yeah, an observation, up until a couple of years ago, I could watch that little wheel spilling on my meter and have some idea. Then I went for the smart pricing, whatever it's called. Now I see these numbers flashing. Don't have a clue what any of them mean, and there is no way for me to see what I am consuming. So it's worse now than it was before. So
but the thing is, do you know if that meter was spinning at the right speed before?
I don't know.
That is a problem. We actually had, when we first started the pilot program, this guy called up the exact same sort of thing. He's like, I like seeing that dial spin, and now I don't say it. I say, well, do you know if it was spinning correctly? And he said, no, but he didn't like not that visual sense. There actually is a way to decode the little numbers that flash on the meter.
But they give you my current consumption and watts?
No, I think one of it cycles through 3 or 4 different sets of numbers. And one of them is actually a cumulative kilowatt hour total.
Yeah, but look,
No, I mean, I agree with you. I wish we had a better feedback mechanism for it.
I tried to install an add-on to my box, and it was so old I couldn't get the clamps around the power cable. Then I realized I shut it off, but I was working above the switch. Then I realized there was no insulation out of that part.
You look to tell about it.
And I looked this up, but my question really is, if I'm buying a new fridge or something, is there something I should be looking for that's going to make it compatible with the stuff coming up, or is it just too early?
Again, I've only seen press releases from few appliance manufacturers saying they're going to start offering it. I don't know if they're actually available in showroom days. So, in probably the next 6 months to a year, the answer is probably no. Further out, we'll see. And again, I think they're going to start it out on the higher end appliances. But I think there's a lot of stuff shaking out. Yes.
Well, I had really good experience with the real-time thing. I always do my dishwashing or dryer at night or weekend. And no matter what I did, I always see my electricity bill was about $80 to $90. And once I switched to the real-time, last month was $50 and this month was $40. So I'm really pleased with it.
Yeah, I mean, electricity prices are really cheap. I mean, one of the pictures I showed earlier on is something called Ambient Orb. It was originally developed for people to track stock prices. It's a little ball. It's got LEDs inside it. It's connected to a pager. And the initial design of it, when the company developed it, was that the stock market was going up, it would be green, and the stock market was going down, it would be red. But people then started playing around with it for other technologies. So we have a small pilot program. We're giving these to people, and we send information to it every hour about what the price of electricity is. And we set up nice little color schemes, starting from blue to green to yellow to red. But the blue was supposed to be when we first set up this color scheme when prices of power are really low. Literally for the last month or two, it's been blue the entire time. So people are calling saying, is this thing still working? Because, it's not going to stay this way forever. Obviously, economic demand will rise again. But right now, we're in a weird bubble of power being very, very cheap.
Are any of these devices being designed so that people have an option as to what level they want to participate? For example, if I recently fired somebody who's tech savvy, I might not want somebody at the power company or anybody who could hack in to turn off my heat during the winter and blow my pipes,
Right.
or know when I'm on vacation and turn off my freezer.
I think that's,
And if there was some way you could say, I'll let the meter tell the power company what I'm doing, but I don't want them messing with my settings, are there going to be little buttons on the system that allow you to choose how much intrusion you want?
Okay, I think I have several different pieces of that. I think that was the big mistake they made in California, where they proposed requiring a new thermostat for everybody, and they did not give people the option to override it. So, I mean, obviously things are different in California. They have rolling blackouts. I mean, they don't always have enough power, so maybe more extreme measures are needed than in other places. But it just flew in the face of people's feelings about what district control needs to be. So when they're busy revamping the standards in California, so they may yet mandate a thermostat utility control.
Wasn't much of California's problem manipulation by the people who control the power?
Yeah, well, that did help.
Well, I mean, this is
No, you're right.
very good, but
No, I think everything in California they screw up and make it more complicated. But they're spending a lot of money on it, so we should learn what we can from it. No, I mean that's was part of the problem. The other thing, so the budget companies have developed thermostats you can control from the internet. It's been interesting to watch the evolution of the interfaces. The first few ones, it was all about changing your temperature, and based upon it, the price of electricity was 8 cents or 8.8 cents. I mean, no one knows what a kilowatt hour is. No one has a sense of what prices of electricity are affiliated or not. So it was too much technical information. The newer generations of these sort of interfaces are much more about give me a value setting, give me a comfort setting. They tie it back to people's lifestyle because people aren't going to worry enough about those things. They might be the saying that I'm having a dinner party. I don't care how much power costs. I need to keep my house cool because I don't want to boil my guests. Or I guess it could go the other way too. It might be at certain times start turning the temperature up so they leave. That's the sort of thing people are going to want. That's what people will engage with. Third point, but I think it's my mind. So I think it says, I think this is still getting this right is not there yet. other questions?
There's something called VPL, broadband over power lines, and you can use power lines for all kinds of Wi-Fi, creates radio interference in those power. Is that being looked at all?
It's being looked at. It's struggled to be successful. It's maybe most attractive in places where there isn't other broadband options.
But I'm talking not for customers, I'm talking just for the smart grid purpose.
There's one company that's really, a couple companies that have, probably the biggest one is a company called Current. They did a pilot in Houston, and the way they actually sold it to the utility was the idea that they were going to put in a broadband over power line system that the utility could use for utility operations. But then they wanted the right to then sell high-speed internet access to all the customers along those wires. So there's another wire in the home. And it just never, apparently it just never worked. And so, because the company, Current, was, I gather, almost gave away their system to the utility for their operations. They thought they could make money off the end-user customers. But they weren't able to provide them a reliable broadband experience, which was the kiss of death of it. They are testing that technology in Boulder. They're doing a very detailed smart grid rollout there. So it's a technology that is around. It seems like it's more expensive still, but has potential. I mean, utilities, for some reason, seem more comfortable with the idea of putting up towers and having the meters talk to the towers over a licensed wireless spectrum. They seem a little less comfortable sending data over their wires.
You mentioned who's going to pay for it. What are some of the pricing for the pay structures that tax pays?
Well, I mean, this stuff will be put into utility rate bases in some shape or form. I mean, there are some tax incentives in some of the recent energy bills to help the utilities pay for the meters. But again, take something like the real-time pricing stuff or any of these programs, they're likely to always be voluntary. So the chance that realistically these meters are going to be put out there, most people who get a smart meter aren't going to change the pricing program they're on. They don't care enough about the energy use to ever do this stuff. The meter, I suppose, will have value for them because maybe for the outage restoration, the utility knowing the power is off, it helps a little bit. I suppose if the meter reading cost goes down, and the little line item in the bill will go down. But they're not making full use of the functionality of the meter. Meanwhile, their neighbor may say, they've seen the stuff on religion, and they say, I want to be on real-time pricing. I want my smart thermostat to shut off when it's needed. I want an in-home display device. They're making full use of the technology in that meter. Should they pay the same amount? Is a real debate. The argument has been that when you cut peak electric demand, it actually lowers the wholesale electric prices, which saves money for everybody. So you don't actually need everybody to participate in programs to lower prices for everybody. You only need maybe 10 or 20% of households and businesses to be actively managing the energy use to make the grid more efficient. So that's great economic theory, but it's very hard to be in a heated battle or rate case. Imagine the Citizens Utility Board being out talking about this. They're saying, you're asking people to pay for technology that goes in someone else's house that lowers their electric bills, and theoretically, economists all tell us it will lower everyone else's bill too, but that's really hard to see. I personally believe it, but I think it's a very hard sell in a sort of political climate that goes around rate increases for utilities. So the other issue would be what is the exposure of low-income customers? So probably, if smart metering probably adds, might be $5, $6, $7 a month per customer, depending on how you pay for it. So for some customers that'd be fine, but for someone who's a small user and low income, that could be a pretty big chunk of their bills. So I think a lot of low income advocates have been saying, we just don't want this because it's going to raise people's bills. Yes, there's some potential benefits that this could make the grid more reliable, lower energy prices in other ways, that upfront costs on people's monthly bills, we don't want to see it. So, I think the way you can do that, you can deal with that in rate stuff. You don't have rates in Illinois that do this, but in California, for example, they have a special discount rate for low-income households. You apply for it and you get electricity at a 10 or 20% discount. So I think there are ways we can protect low-income households from the additional costs. Although the fact is, the programs we've run with real-time pricing, the low-income customers are probably actually do really well because they tend to have less air conditioning and fewer energy hogging appliances. So the fact is, they actually do really well on real-time pricing. But again, it's a transitional issue, and I think it still needs to be worked out. So I suspect come 2011, 2012, when there's rate cases to do this, there's going to be rigorous debates about how to allocate the cost, how much of it, a lot of the meters a big chunk of the cost, but all that automation on the system benefits everybody. But there's more residential meters than business meters. So the businesses are probably saying, we don't want to pay for all those residential meters, even though the residential customers make their energy use more efficient, it's going to benefit businesses as well. So I don't know how it's going to play out, but it's going to be a good fight.
You said $5 a month per person per
That's
month.
a rough estimate. I mean,
Is that amortized over so many years, or is that because it seems like there's a initial cost you have to spread out, but then over time it would.
it's the initial
potentially
cost of
fall
the metering,
back.
it's also the communication infrastructure, the ongoing maintenance fee. I mean, the way utility regulation works, you get something to rate base, and it's there until next year have a rate case. So it's a very weird, counterintuitive accounting system. For a while, some electric utilities were saying this would cost you about the same amount as a small pizza a month, which I thought was a terrible metaphor. But, they seem to think it was their way of saying this isn't going to cost a lot, but I don't think people thought that way.
Do the companies have any intention of giving the consumers the benefit if they don't have to send a meter reader out as often, or their crews are more efficient? Why are they going to charge the public X dollars a month for all this technology?
That's the part of the thing that goes, that's the part of the thing that's
money.
right.
It's like when the banks didn't give you anything when they stopped mailing you a statement.
That's part of what goes into this mix. Is the meter is more expensive, but you save money elsewhere. And again, that's the challenge in rate cases, is finding out how to properly allocate those costs and demonstrating that, in fact, the meter reading costs are less. That was one of the things ComEd's really trying to do with their pilot next year, is have a real set geography so they can really compare two comparable areas. And is our cost of getting meter information from the meters lower in the area where we're not sending out crews? The other thing would be that in theory the meter reading accuracy should be a lot higher. That should have a benefit. But again, we're going to fight about how much that savings actually is. And the utilities want to say that they're going to save. They want to. I think they like the capital investments they put into their rate base, like $5 a month forever. So they want to say that the meter reading savings so that they can justify how exactly it'll play out. Stay tuned.
Mine is $250 a month for 1 year. That's what they told me. So
Well,
I mean,
right now,
$250 is nothing.
Yeah, right now for the Power Smart pricing program and the program for ComEd, people actually have to pay a little bit more for their meter because they have a special meter. One of the things that will happen when these meters get put everywhere is you won't have to pay more for a special meter. I think when we were setting up these programs, we wanted. I mean, our dream was that people wouldn't have to pay more for the special meter, but we weren't able to do that.